Yep.
No, it's already on. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna call this policy meeting to order. We'll do attendance. Dr. Russell,
Here.
Mr. Saylor, I am here. Mr. Keenan, Miss Sarah Evans Brockett,
Here.
Miss Laura White, Mr. Ryan Marsh,
Here.
Mr. Chaz Clellan,
Here.
Mr. Robert Liggett,
Here.
Mr. Russ Larson,
Here.
Mr. Jay Cohen, Miss Judy Lofton. Oh, this says Miss Laurie. Is there Dr. Smith? Dr. Smith. Mr. Ryan Moran, Dr. Boyd, Mr. Weaver. Okay. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would anyone from the audience like to make any comments? No? Okay. Mr. Keenan, how are you?
Good evening.
All right, review cycle policies. Dr. Russell?
Thank you, Mr. Saylor. And for the first two policies, there are no recommended revisions. These have to do with persistently dangerous schools or victims of violent crimes that occur in a particular school. I don't know if anyone has questions about those, but administration isn't recommending any changes at this point.
Any questions from anybody? No. We'll move those forward. 823.
823, the updates that you see here in the notes are in response to some comments coming out of the last policy committee meeting. And the policy provides guidance for the acquisition.
Can we interrupt real quick? Is there a way we can get that on? Because I don't think they can see that. I apologize.
That's okay.
I saw you stretching your neck, so I was like, he can't see.
Let's see. All right, let's see if we can get them.
Do we need that stick?
We might. Let me see if they're blinking. Let's see. Okay, there it comes. Let's see if this one comes on now.
I don't know if we need this one. Well, no, they're looking at their computers. Are you looking at your computer or that? Yeah.
We need the stick, because otherwise. Oh, okay, we're good. Excellent.
You good? Okay.
So last month, when we spoke about some of the content in policy 823, naloxone, there was a comment, some feedback around generalizing the reference to these drugs that are given in response to a student who may be overdosing or has been exposed to a lot of medication, opioids, some other drug, and has gone into some sort of allergic reaction in response. So the policy provides guidance for the acquisition, storage, training, and administration of naloxone by district employees. The revisions are related to the reference to the medications throughout the policy so that we've generalized and not specified one over some of the others that now exist. Narcan is another common example. So that's the purpose of the revisions that you see in this draft.
Anyone have any comments, questions?
No, I read through it. It made sense.
Okay.
So conflict of interest. So let me talk about this for a minute. Moving on then, if it's okay. Is it okay, Mr. Saylor, to move that to first reading, 825?
823, you mean? We didn't do
I'm
statement.
sorry, 823, excuse me.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. 825, state mandate waivers. So there are times when the district applies for a waiver to be relieved of some mandate, as the title implies. For example, we've applied for two waivers in my experience. One has been for the purpose of allowing Title I funds to serve more than the elementary schools that would otherwise qualify. You can apply for a waiver and get approval for that. I believe it was 2008 that we did that. The second waiver that we applied to the state for was really around a GIEP caseload, where we exceeded what the state indicates is possible. When we apply for these waivers, they are either approved or they're not. And we have letters on file that indicate in these two cases they were approved. So that's just a sense, that's just intended to give you a sense of the purpose of this policy and what it referenced to. Those are two examples of two waivers the district has applied for and in both cases was approved for. Based on state mandates, we were granted exceptions to those mandates. There are no recommended revisions to the policy, but just an example or two of how it applies.
Okay.
So we'll move that to first reading. Policy 827, when you saw this on Friday, there were no recommended revisions to this policy. However, I wanted to check with my administrative assistant and our board secretary, because the policy indicates, if we go into the language, that let me find the section. The policy, say it again?
Yeah, it's highlighted.
Okay, and it's stricken here. So the policy indicates that all board members and employees shall be provided with a copy of this policy and acknowledge in writing that they have been made aware of it. We do not currently have that practice in place. And in looking at, so that raised a question I verified with our board secretary. So for example, when board members are onboarded, they are not asked to sign a conflict of interest document, nor are our employees. So I looked around at some other district policies, and it's not uncommon to see the first statement there, all board members and employees, or in the case of Wissahickon district administrators, shall be provided with a copy of this policy. And then any additional training that's necessary will be provided to those that need it. So I'm suggesting that we eliminate the portion of that statement where everyone signs something, unless the committee would feel differently about that. We've also added some language here about the Employees Ethics Act, which really also covers some of what's considered when there is a conflict of interest or a perception of a conflict of interest. Moving down this policy, just to give you a sense of some of the suggested revisions, the information under organizational conflicts, reporting, investigation, and disciplinary actions have been moved into an administrative regulation as an example of a process that we would follow when reporting any conflicts of interest. So that information has been pulled. We saw that in some other policies for some other districts, in that they were a bit more succinct. But this would outline the steps one would follow when they are suspecting there's a conflict of interest at play somewhere. and the steps that we would take to report, investigate, and then enact any consequences.
Any questions on that? Nope.
No.
Move that forward.
Okay?
Mhm.
Very good. Thank you. And then 912 is relations with educational institutions. And there were some subtle changes here, some revisions suggested actually by Dr. Smith. Yep. Just so that it reads a little bit more clearly. Otherwise, no recommended changes to the content of the policy. Any
Questions or issues? Nope, move that forward. Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you.
There are no policies or legal from PSBA. We have one policy for a local policy review. Dr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Saylor. So this is 109. We have been talking about this for quite a bit here at Policy Committee. Based upon the feedback from last month's meeting, what you will see is at the very beginning of the policy, there was some conversation about the Library Bill of Rights and whether that should be that we as a district or the board accepts that. We did change that to will consider based upon the input from the committee. We also have added AR 8 to address the questions about what will be posted publicly online so that parents and community members are aware of books that have gone through a reevaluation process and the outcome of that to make that much more clear and specific. The only other thing I'd like to call out is that the librarians have reviewed everything at their last meeting, and they are suggesting, and this is not on the actual changes here because it was something I just received, in the section of policy under parental considerations, the second sentence there says the district shall inform parents of how to access the school library database. They're just suggesting we change that word database to library management system because in their world, database could mean the World Book Online database that we have or lots of different databases that they maintain as part of the library. So that's just more a semantics piece to make it clear. So I would recommend that as well. Other than that, administration is not recommending any other changes at this point. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I'll just note,
Hold on.
oh,
okay.
sorry.
During the last meeting and the meeting prior to that, we have talked about sexual content. We have talked about what was originally in 109.2, and part of the reason that we're in the situation of reviewing this is books have been found that had sexual content in it, and we have seen that there is no policy at the elementary, the middle school, or the high school that properly defines this. I asked administration at the last meeting to go through this and come up with a better test, and that has been ignored, and I still have a problem with that. And I would suggest if it's going to be ignored that we're going to go back to the definition that is in 109.2 that was originally proposed. And that's what I would put on the table.
If I could respond to that, you're correct, Mr. Cohen. That was something that you did mention again at our last meeting. I certainly did not ignore that. I did go back and look at 109.2 again, and I believe if we think back to where this whole conversation started, this is where it started about sexually explicit material, and we had quite a lot of conversation about that, and it moved to age-appropriate material, and now I feel like we've come full circle back around to the sexually explicit. I think when we discussed this, at least administration did not feel that the language in 109.2 wasn't clear. What is implied? We talked about, what's explicit, what's a visual depiction, what's visually implied. So we did review it again. We are just as administration not recommending that language from 109.2. We feel like we have added a lot to this policy and quite a bit actually from 109.2 that we are addressing that, maybe just not explicitly in the same language that is here, but we have increased our selection process and our reevaluation. So I didn't ignore it, but we are not recommending at this point to include that language.
Okay, so what we have is a situation where we're not defining the objectives of what should be in the collection at the middle school, at the elementary school, and at the high school, we're leaving it up to people's judgment, which I think is wrong.
I do. I have 1092 right here, yeah. And I would say that the selection guidelines indicate what we should be selecting material on. Abilities, reading levels, maturation levels of the students to be served.
And that's under somebody's discretion. And it needs to be spelled out in policy.
You have something?
Not on this.
No. So you mentioned, how do we define age appropriate?
So librarians utilize many different resources that recommend the age levels that different reviewers have done. You know, this might be appropriate for young adolescents. This might be appropriate. Sometimes they actually list by grade. So they use that to guide some of their decisions. Certainly, there could be 5 different reviews that have different recommendations for what that level is. So they do have to make a judgment call, and that is their role to make that judgment call.
So we have books in the middle school that some would say aren't age appropriate based off of the standards that the school has, meaning librarians removed in 5th grade, because it's elementary school, librarians removed some forms of Dr. Seuss books for 5th graders because they were not appropriate, partly because the vendor, the Dr. Seuss vendor, said, hey, we're taking these books away. And so, but we didn't do it as a school district. One building did, others didn't, and it wasn't consistent, right? And there's not much age difference between a 5th grader and a 6th grader, and we have books in our middle school that, you know, have sexual content, F words, S words, a lot of curse words in it. How do we ensure, and this was one of the questions I originally asked a long time ago before I started challenging books, how do you differentiate between who has access to an 8th grade book, a young adolescent, and a 6th grader? So for instance, there's multiple books. There are 5 books that I know of in middle school where the vendor says that these books are appropriate for 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, but they're available for 6th and 7th grade because it's in the same library. And some of these books have, you know, one of the books has the F word 97 times in the book. That's a lot for a book that's 120 pages. That's almost on every single page that the F word's in the book, as well as a sexually explicit scene in the book. So if the vendor who sells that book says this is appropriate for 8th grade, okay, the vendor is more knowledgeable than I am. I disagree, right? Vehemently disagree. But the vendor is telling the school district that this book is not for a 6th or 7th grader. But yet, how do we have the means to make sure that that book's not reviewed by a 6th or 7th grader?
So you're correct in all transparency. When a book is in the library, it is available and accessible to all students in that building. We don't distinguish or put a label on the book that this is for 8th graders and up, nor do we check that as they are checking out.
But our database does.
What do you mean by our database?
If you look up the book in the databases, the book will tell you 8th grade.
Correct, but I mean that the librarian doesn't say, oh, you're a 7th grader, you can't check that book out, because the book is available for the students. I think, you know, some of it, unfortunately, it is subjective. A book is rated, if you want to say, by a publisher as to what it might be, but my 8th grade child might be very different than your 8th grade child, so what's appropriate for mine is different than what is for yours. So you're right, they are available to all of the students in that particular library. I just think we've done a really good job of strengthening this policy for what those selection processes look like, and as well as a reevaluation process if there's a concern about a book already in the library.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd just ask a little bit, like, what here in this, so for instance, if somebody donated a trove of Penthouse magazine, what would perhaps, I mean, would that just be displayed here on the shelves, or
A donation goes to the school board. It's an agenda item on the school board.
every donated book?
Yeah. Am I wrong about that?
Donations are received
I
by
think
the...
there are a lot of donations that are displayed here. Anyway,
I thought donations are listed on the school board.
You are made aware of donations question. You are made aware of donations made to the district.
Correct.
When librarians receive books, they review them as to the appropriateness for the library.
But what he said, if somebody donated what he's talking about, that gets presented to the board, correct?
So our librarians receive that. They have a communication that they send to the donor saying, thank you for the donation. This will be reviewed based upon our selection criteria in policy 109. If those items should be deemed appropriate based upon our selection criteria, I assume that would then prompt on the school board agenda as a donation that we have received.
Right.
If they meet our selection criteria.
Okay, so
Okay.
they could, I mean, let's then say that they bought a historical archive of Penthouse magazine because of its artistic value. Does it they just get to display it on the shelves here?
No, I would say it would need to go through the selection criteria, and, I would venture to say that that type of material would not meet our selection criteria.
Yeah, I think that's a bad example, because even if it did meet the criteria, it's gonna then be presented to the board that somebody donated, did you say Penthouse? Somebody donated Penthouse, and I can't imagine any sitting school board, no matter what their makeup, would be like, yeah, that's cool, let's move forward with that.
The donation, yeah, with the aspect, but what, I'm just asking, what part of, did I say that? What part of this policy prevents it from coming in? Is it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8?
Oh, I see what you're saying,
Yeah.
I see.
Right.
I mean, I would go right away to number one. What are the interests or abilities or maturation levels of our students? I think most of us around the table would agree that having a Penthouse magazine is not appropriate for a school library.
But we have books, I mean, showing sex between kids and they're appropriate. And, I mean, Penthouse, I don't even know if it's gonna be that explicit, but probably about the same, and maybe a lot more artistic. So why wouldn't it be appropriate?
I
It
don't
has
wanna-
stories in it, right?
Well, I don't want to disagree with you, because I like you, and I don't want to disagree with anybody, but there's a difference between, and if I'm overstepping, but I haven't looked at a Penthouse in a long time, but a picture and a drawing are two different things. So the book that you're talking about is a drawing, not a picture. Fun
Oh.
Home is a drawing. Somebody drew, it's a drawing, it's
Under
not
the
an
law,
actual.
though, drawings and photographs are the same as far as their representations, though. I mean,
I'm not a lawyer.
for
that I
legal
don't know.
purposes, the picture has to be a legal picture.
Yeah.
But it's still the same category if you're showing it to minors. But we're exempted here because we're a
Library.
library. So, I mean, I'm just having a tough time, like, seeing the difference.
Do you think that this updated policy would prevent some of the books that we currently have from being stocked?
I mean, I can't speak to that completely. Yes, I do. I will tell you, and in the absence of a humanities supervisor, I have been the one reviewing the list of books that have been coming through, and I can tell you that our librarians are using a very fine-tooth comb in what they're suggesting. They're looking at more references, more published reviews than they ever have in the past, and being very critical. They have heard the conversations in our community, and when they have come to me, I have looked at it with a very critical eye as well. I think a comparison between Penthouse and books that we have in our library is just, it's just out of,
Yeah, I'm gonna try to,
Appropriate.
I mean, I don't, yeah. Well,
I'm just looking for the differences.
I understand. So, Dr. Russell, you were shaking your head, yes, I can't, because, but do you, look, I challenge books because, I first went through the route of, as you know, talking to you about the books, and you said, hey, these books have to be challenged. So we challenged books, and I know we got a lot of piss and vinegar about books being challenged, but I am very content with the end result of, because of the challenges of the books, because of the information that was brought to light, because of the updated policies. Yes, I can tell yes, the fact that we've updated these policies, the fact that we're looking at more sites, there are more books. Some of these books that were challenged would not be put in because they don't fit the criterias that we're looking at. Like, I look at a book that I've talked to you about that's in the middle school and say, read the book, good book. It's deep. It's historical. It has a lot of background to it, to today's day and age and what happens in youth. Vendor publisher clearly says it's for 8th graders. A book in 6th grade with all these bad words, multiple sex scenes, doesn't fit the bill when we're removing caricature books for elementary school. And the difference between a 5th grader and a 6th grader is 3 months, right? July, August, September, you're right back in there. So, and my original content was some of these books that I challenged. One of the books that I challenged, the publisher said 10th, 11th, and 12th. It was that same issue of, hey, this is really for a 10th grader, but can be read by a 9th grader. And then some of the books that weren't challenged that I've spoken to both of you about on our website mentions that school in Pennsylvania that rates a lot of these books. They're not rated for the full class that we have. They're rated for some of the schools where that organization rated books. They have 5, 6 centers, 7, 8 centers, where we have 6, 7, and 8.
Right.
So, if we think that I don't think it's perfect, and I still think we need to figure out a way to address sexual explicit nature. But part of the process is, are we tightening up our grip to making sure books don't get in? I don't want to prevent anyone from reading a book. It's not being banned, because you could go buy the book on Amazon. You could go to Walgreens or Target or CVS, or you could go to the bookstore to go buy the book. But do we want books in our middle school that a student, you couldn't give this book out for a reading assignment, summer reading assignment. Just would never happen, right? Are we tightening up the grip? Rowan, God love you. I understand what you're thinking, but I just think that's a bad example of a.
I'm just having a discussion.
Yeah.
I don't actually think it's a bad example. People can see them as the same. And the point, though, of that is, I was following up on, I think that it needs some analysis to take analysis of the sexual content, of the arousal factor, the pandering to prurient interests factor, that kind of issue, that we are not trying to have these things that distract from education for students, including the absolutely outlandish ones that everybody's like, oh no, we would never put that in, until you find something like that in there, and then you can't challenge it and have a proper discussion about the actual issue, which is not that it's pretty or it's instructive or it illustrates a important part of our society. It's that it's sexual, and we shouldn't have that in a school library.
I guess I'll follow on to what Mr. Keenan was saying. For me, I think that selection criteria or guideline number 1 that talks about the maturation levels of the students is somewhat subjective, which Dr. Smith, you mentioned. And I think the point that now I'm taking from Mr. Keenan is that a drawn picture can elicit a similar response as a photo. So even though, I agree with what Mr. Saylor was saying, that maybe the example was extreme and probably wouldn't make it in the library, the point that you're saying that if you're just looking at maturation levels and we say, okay, a drawn picture is okay, but a photo isn't, responses in people can be similar. So I guess the point I'm going to make is, I wish then this called out a little bit more specificity of age appropriateness or age appropriateness standards, kind of where I think Mr. Cohen was going earlier. I just wish that this called that out a little bit more. I was going to make an earlier comment, so I'll just tack on to what I'm saying here when I was first going to make a comment, which is that there's been some changes to the policies and the AR regs that are positive and they're on the right track. So things like, the district website will be updated when books are submitted. I think that's great for the community. That's the transparency that I think we want to see. For me, that satisfies a lot. Also, the verbiage to say that we'll consider the School Library Bill of Rights and the American Association of Libraries as opposed to that we would adopt whatever they said. That language is excellent. So for me, this last element of if there was just a little more specificity around age appropriate, that went a little bit beyond just simple maturation levels, I think it would be helpful probably to the whole community. But I am, it is positive to see the changes that have been made thus far. So thank you.
Does anyone disagree that a book in K through 5 shouldn't have curse words? Okay.
I'm going to say it shouldn't have 100 curse words.
Well,
I mean, if it's pervasive, that's an issue.
definitely shouldn't have 100 or
But I'm not going to prevent a fifth grader from reading Tom Sawyer.
It's true.
My kids did. So,
Tom Sawyer's not in our elementary school; it's in our middle school.
yeah.
Your microphone's off.
To your point, I mean, if the book is pervasive with obscene language, then it needs to be looked at, and we should have a little more specificity with age appropriateness.
Anybody else?
I guess my only question would be, so are you sending this back again for some definition of age appropriateness? I guess I just feel like I can bring something back that is still going to be subjective. There's not a clean set definition of age appropriateness unless we're going to pick one exact publisher who we're going to go by, and whatever grades they say is appropriate, that's what's appropriate. Because again, one seventh grader is different than another seventh grader. So I guess I'm wondering, if you're giving direction for administration to take it back and bring another revision, what is it that you're looking for in that, and is that where the whole group is at?
Everyone seems very quiet today. You know,
The review panel, is there a board member at all on that? Is there a board member at all?
No, there's not a board member on the reevaluation committee. It goes to the board if the,
If there can't be, that's fine.
well, no one's talking, so put it to first read and have the full board to have a conversation about it.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Comments from the audience? Okay, meeting's adjourned.